Hey y'all, what's up? Welcome back to the Farmer's Table. I'm so glad to have you here in my kitchen today. My name is Jess. If you're new here, I'm glad you're here. If you're not new here, I'm also glad you're here. Today, I am actually working on processing the end of the garden harvest. We had our first freeze a couple weeks ago, which of course killed all of the frost tender plants, but I've got a couple of 5-gallon buckets of peppers over here that I picked, and I've been steadily working on those since that happened. And today I am making something that the recipe has been requested many times. It's a recipe I've been making for years. It's called Cowboy candy. And right here, I have lots of sliced up jalapenos, and I'm going to be creating a really kind of sweet, savory syrup to can these in. You let it sit for a few weeks after it's canned, and as you can see here, I've got a mix of red and green peppers because these jars are going to be going in baskets that I'm making for Christmas gifts. That's why I'm doing this. Cowboy candy is really delicious. The way you use it, the way I use it, I guess I should say, I like to just take cream cheese and put it on something like a cracker or some bread and put a few pieces of cowboy candy on top, just a few of the candied peppers. I usually can these in like 4 to 8 ounce jars. Once they're open in the fridge, you probably have a couple of months. It's in sugar and vinegar, which makes it last a really long time, but even in the fridge, after a couple of months, it might start getting weird or getting moldy spots. So I like to do smaller containers because I can't get through a quart-sized jar or larger within the time that it's gonna be ideally fresh. So one thing I really like to do is if I've got like a 4-ounce jar of cowboy candy, or an 8 ounce, I just use part of it, is I'll put a block of cream cheese in a food processor and mix cowboy candy in to taste. Usually I'll do a whole 4-ounce jar to a block, but you could play with that and find out what you like, and make a dip that's kind of like a candied jalapeno popper dip. It's really, really tasty, and when you've got these pretty kind of festive colors of the red and green peppers, it goes really well on like a charcuterie spread for a Christmas party or something like that. So that's what I'm doing today. I have seen where people have used cowboy candy to like dress up chicken recipes, like roast chicken, you eat it with cowboy candy and stuff like that. I think that would be really good, especially if you like the like savory and sweet spicy combo. I think that it's fairly versatile. I can't say that I can give you like 100 uses for cowboy candy, but I've never felt like I needed a whole bunch of uses. I just really like it with cream cheese, and that's what we typically do. One thing we have done that was really good, and I guess gives it some versatility, is mixing it with cream cheese, as I mentioned, in a food processor and making that spread. If you take a bagel or some crusty bread and spread it with that popper spread, which is cowboy candy mixed with cream cheese, and then do like a turkey sandwich with that, that's really good. So that is one kind of little versatile way to use it. So I'm gonna put a printable PDF of this recipe down below so you guys can print it out and always have access to it. With that being said, I'm going to mostly follow that recipe, but when it comes to something like this, I'm usually doing things in a roundabout manner. The main thing is that the syrup that I'm making is going to be 3 cups vinegar to 4 cups sugar. That's gonna make a good deal of syrup. According to the recipe, that is supposed to work with about 4 pounds of jalapenos. You can use any kind of peppers for this recipe. You can actually cut up bell peppers for this if you do not like spicy. Neutral or not spicy banana peppers are another one that you can candy, kind of get some of that pepper flavor with the sweet savory syrup, and it's really tasty. Today I've actually taken about half jalapenos, which of course are spicy, and half notapenos, which is a garden variety of pepper that taste very similar to jalapenos but do not have the spice. So I've mixed them in half just to make this cowboy candy a little more doable for people who maybe can't handle a lot of heat. I've made it with all kinds of peppers. I've candied several different kinds. I've candied really hot peppers like Sugar Rush peach peppers and serrano peppers. I've done cowboy candy with those. I've never gone anything hotter than like a habanero just because I can't handle heat like that. But I've also candied mild banana peppers. I have candied a mix of bell peppers with jalapenos. So you can get creative with what you have. If you don't want to like think too much about it, jalapenos is the traditional way to do cowboy candy. I'm using turbinado sugar in this recipe, which is more commonly known as like sugar in the raw, if you've ever seen that. It's this kind of thick brown unbleached sugar. This has a more caramelly taste. You can use like white regular sugar, what you would get at the store, that's fine. I just like to use this sugar in the raw because of the extra layer of rich flavor that it has. I'm putting 4 cups in here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat on to medium, and I'm going to add 3 cups of apple cider vinegar. You can use regular white vinegar if you want to. I like the ACV because I think it adds a nice layer of flavor. Got a nice apple flavor to it. You do want to use 5% vinegar because this is a canning recipe. So I make like apple scrap vinegar. I've got some going on the counter right now, which is from, I was making apple butter with some apples and I saved the scraps. Homemade vinegar is great to have. I use it in dressings and things like that. But anything that I'm gonna do canning with, I go ahead and use store-bought vinegar to make sure that it's 5%. If that doesn't bother you, you don't have to worry about it. It's just a rule that I choose to follow. So the sugar and the vinegar is on the heat. And of course, as this heats up, the sugar is gonna melt. I'm gonna go ahead and add 2 tablespoons of garlic granules in here. I actually also add some chopped garlic into the peppers themselves. It's optional. The garlic granules are really enough to give it the oomph of flavor, but I like adding the fresh garlic as well. The thing with Cowboy candy is that if you get the sugar and the vinegar right, you could do nothing else. You could just candy the jalapenos in the sugar and the vinegar. That's going to give you the syrup, you're going to have the heat, you're going to have the sweet, it's going to be safe to can it. But beyond that, adding in these extra seasonings is just to add layers of flavor. So you don't have to have this if you don't have any of these ingredients. This recipe, I'm going to put it on the recipe. It calls for turmeric. I'm out of turmeric, so this batch is not going to have turmeric in it. I think turmeric is good in it, but I have the peppers today. I have the time to can them today, so I'm leaving that ingredient out, and it's fine. That's not one of the imperative ingredients to make this work. If I were out of sugar, I would not be making this recipe today. The sugar, the vinegar, and the peppers, non-negotiable. The seasoning, feel free to play with. Now I'm doing 2 teaspoons of mustard seeds. I like using actual mustard seed in this because I think it's pretty and just adds some kind of dynamic. You can see the mustard seeds in the brine, but you can use ground mustard here, and in which case I would just use a couple of teaspoons of that as well. I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of ground ginger. It's going to give it a little bit of a holiday flavor. So you have an option here. If you want to go spicy, like if you really like spicy, you could put a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Since I'm kind of trying to make this a little more neutral, I'm actually just going to put in 1 tablespoon of ancho chili powder. So it's going to have a little bit of heat, but more than that, it's just going to have flavor. So I'm going to go ahead and add that into the syrup. I'm going to mix this until the sugar is fully dissolved. And like I said, all the seasonings, they're somewhat optional. I really like adding that layer of savoriness to Cowboy candy. Cowboy candy is so good to me because it's just unexpected, you know. You've got the spiciness of the peppers, you have the sweetness of the sugar, and then you add all these seasonings in, so you have this really savory note. And then you mix it with something like cream cheese, and that with the sugar. Oh, makes my mouth water just thinking about it. But if you are not a big fan of like savory with sweet, just do this with the sugar and the vinegar and the peppers, and then you'll have the sweet and hot without all of the savory layers. As this comes up to being like at the point of boiling, I'm just stirring it. And when it comes up to boiling, I'm going to add all of my sliced jalapenos in. So when it comes to chopping up peppers, you definitely want to wear gloves because we're talking about dealing with a whole lot of peppers here. And this could definitely mess you up if you were to do this barehanded. There are chemical compounds in these peppers that obviously burn, and when you're dealing with them over the extended period of 30 minutes of chopping peppers, not only can it burn your fingers, like actually burn your fingers, if you then touch like your mouth or your eyes, you're just going to be in a world of pain. So wear gloves. You want to slice them in nice, relatively even little discs. If you are trying to avoid some heat, you can take the step of de-seeding the jalapenos. I don't do that simply because that takes a lot of time, and I'm just not willing to put that much time into it. So what I do as I mentioned, is I'll use like half spicy peppers and half not spicy peppers. That's how I temper down the heat, because that's a heck of a lot faster than deseeding all these. But if you just go into the store and you're buying jalapenos to make this, and you don't want a ton of heat, if you take the time to take the seeds and the membrane on the inside out, you will have a less spicy end product. All right, this is starting to simmer and boil a little bit. I'm gonna add these peppers in carefully so that it's not splashing everywhere. These are gonna cook down a lot. When I first made Cowboy candy, and I just like felt like I chopped peppers for a year, and then I cooked it down and it only made, you know, so many jars, I was like, what the heck? So I typically will double or even triple this recipe, or I'll do multiple batches over the course of a couple of weeks, because they do cook down so much that you think you're gonna have a whole lot, and you end up, I always end up with less than I think I'm gonna have. So this is on medium heat. Here I've got 5 cloves of garlic that's chopped up. This is an optional step. The garlic powder itself is really enough to give it garlic flavor. I'm just kind of the mind that you can never go wrong with adding fresh garlic to things. So, all right, while this simmers down, I'm gonna go ahead and put my water bath canner on the stove and turn it on. You can make this recipe and not can it. You may want to cut it in half. I don't know that you would need this much at any point. And you can give it to people not canned. Just tell them that it needs to stay in the refrigerator. However, I'm going to can this because my plan for Christmas gifts is to give baskets with different jams and jellies and things like the Cowboy candy, as well as some fresh baked bread. And so I go ahead and can it whenever I make it. So I usually like to make a lot. All right, this has come back to simmering with the syrup, and now I'm gonna let this cook for 15 minutes until after 15 minutes my peppers are gonna be nice and broke down, but I just want them to cook in the syrup and absorb them. And I just want to show you guys, when I poured those in, it was very full, and already it's almost down to the level of the syrup. After 15 minutes, these will have cooked down quite a bit more. All right, it's been about 15 minutes and my peppers have cooked down significantly over here. I've got the canner going. I have some 8-ounce jars prepared, and I am going to use a slotted spoon, and I'm actually gonna fill these jars with the peppers, and then once they're full of the peppers, I'm gonna take the syrup that's left here and I'm gonna pour it into the jars to cover the peppers up, and then we'll put the lids on and water bath can them. So now that I've got all of the peppers packed into these jars, I'm going to go ahead and pour the syrup that's left over here in the pan over top of them. I'm going to go up to about this band on filling them with the syrup, so that I'm leaving, you know, about a ½ inch of head space here. I've got a wet rag here, and I'm going to wipe the rims off of all of these jars. That way if I spilled anything on there, I don't have to worry about it hindering the seal. I accidentally dropped a jar on the ground and spilled peppers everywhere, so real life kitchen here. And now I'm going to take my lids and put them on, tighten these down. I don't want them crazy tight, just, I think they call it finger tight, which is basically as tight as you can twist it with the tips of your fingers. You don't want to wrench it down on there, but you do want it tight enough that it can seal. And then I'm going to process these jars in the water bath canner for 15 minutes. The water is boiling right now, and obviously the contents of these jars are hot. When my 18-year-old son was little, he called this tool the grabber, and it has forever been dubbed that in our house. When I can't find it, I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, where's the grabber? That's what kids will do to you. I'll put them all in here and then I'll start the timer. There is a little bit of the syrup left over, and this has been my experience. I've tried multiple people's ratios as far as Cowboy candy. This recipe is more or less based off the Ball canning book recipe. I went ahead and I kind of go with their recipes a lot of times, just because I know like the acid and sugar ratio is going to be right to make sure that this is going to can safely, and there's always syrup left over. So I've got a good deal of this syrup. Now, I don't want to throw this away because, one, I mean, that's ingredients. That's sugar, that's vinegar. It's got all of the spiciness of the jalapenos. So a lot of times what I will do, once my batch of canning is done, I'll go ahead and pour this all in a jar. Sometimes I'll just pour it in a quart jar, stick it in the fridge, and find something to do with it. Like one time I made pork chop, poured this over the top of them so it had that sweet and spicy thing. If you have any great ideas for this, I would love to hear them. I tend to draw a blank. I mean, I've found ways to use it in the past, but I do always go ahead and say that you don't have to throw this away. If you had more peppers that you needed to cut up, if you had the syrup left over, you could add more peppers to it. Cook them down and do them much the same way. 15 minutes later, I'm gonna go ahead and pull these out of the canner. Here, you can see, there's my lovely little Cowboy candies, red and green. So will go great in my gift baskets. I will put instructions in this for people to make the popper dip, which I would do. These are 8-ounce jars, so I would do half of this jar with 1 block of cream cheese. When it comes to something like that, if you're gonna make something, feel free to play around and find your preference. That's totally fun. You might like it with more cream cheese, you may like it with more peppers in it. I will tell you, I did attempt at one point to make Cowboy candy with honey instead of sugar, and I did not figure that out. If somebody has a recipe that they felt like really turned out well with honey, please share it, because I'm sure somebody out there would be really interested in that. This is not a health food. It's not something that we're ever eating under the impression that it's a health food, but it is something that makes for a really sweet little treat, a cool way to use peppers that's not the really traditional way. And so I just use sugar. However, I do use that raw sugar because I feel like I like the way that it tastes. So that is it for today. I hope you guys enjoy this and that you will feel inspired to give something like this a try. Thank you for hanging out with me today. God bless you. Until next time.